The air in the grand hall was thick with the scent of lilies and ambition. Naomi smoothed the front of her emerald green dress, the silk cool against her skin despite the nervous warmth blooming in her chest. She was one of perhaps 100 women, all seated on delicate, gilded chairs that looked as though they would shatter under her weight. They wouldn't, of course. Everything in this house, a sprawling mansion tucked into the most expensive hills overlooking Los Angeles, was built of stronger stuff than it appeared. It was a fortress disguised as a palace, much like the man who owned it. She had never seen him, not in person, but his reputation was a shadow that fell over the entire city. Kwon Jae-hwan, head of the formidable Chongryong Syndicate. A man whose name was spoken in whispers in boardrooms and back alleys alike. And today, for reasons that still felt like a fever dream, he was looking for a wife. The invitation had been discreet, passed through a network of community leaders and business associates, a summons masquerading as an opportunity. A marriage interview. It felt archaic, insulting even, but the world Jae-hwan inhabited operated on its own set of ancient rules. Naomi, a highly sought-after architectural consultant with her own successful firm, had come out of a defiant curiosity. She wanted to see the kind of man who thought he could summon a wife, like ordering a custom suit. She wanted to look power in the eye and see if it blinked. Around her, the other women were a curated collection of perfection. Slim, demure, with pedigrees that shone like polished silver. They eyed Naomi with a mixture of confusion and dismissal. Her presence, with her full, confident curves and her unapologetic blackness, was an anomaly. She did not fit the mold. She had no intention of trying. Finally, a severe-looking woman with a clipboard called her name. The walk down the long, marble hallway was a study in silence. Her heels clicked a steady, defiant rhythm against the floor. The guards at the double doors, men carved from granite and dressed in impeccable black suits, did not meet her eyes. They simply opened the way into the lion's den. The room was a study in dark wood and darker shadows. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto a meticulously arranged garden, but the heavy brocade curtains were partially drawn, keeping the space in a perpetual twilight. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, not looking at her. He was focused on a single, perfect white stone he rolled between his thumb and forefinger. Kwon Jae-hwan was younger than she expected, perhaps in his mid-30s. His black hair was expertly cut, his jaw sharp, and his suit was a masterpiece of tailoring that bespoke immense wealth and a disdain for fleeting trends. He radiated a cold, predatory stillness. "Naomi Preston," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb the light in the room. He did not look up. "Your file says you are an architect." "A consultant," she corrected, her voice even. "I advise on large-scale urban development projects." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were chips of black ice. They scanned her from head to toe, a slow, dismissive appraisal that was meant to unnerve. It was a look she had seen before, from men who thought her body or her race disqualified her from rooms she had earned her way into. She met his gaze without flinching. "This is a waste of your time," he stated, not asked. "And mine." Naomi felt a slow, cold anger begin to build. "Then perhaps your staff should have been more discerning with their invitations." A flicker of something, surprise, maybe annoyance, crossed his features. He set the stone down with a soft, definitive click. "My father's staff is sentimental. They believe in fairy tales. I do not. A woman like you, you have built your own life. You have your own ambitions. You're not suited for the role of my wife." The dismissal was absolute. The insult, wrapped in a backhanded compliment, was clear. The role of his wife was to be silent, decorative, and without a will of her own. He had looked at her strength and her presence, and found her wanting because she was not a doll to be placed on a shelf. A quiet fury, sharp and clean, settled over her. She gave him a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "You're right," she said, her tone crisp. "I'm not." And without another word, she turned her back on the most dangerous man in the city and walked toward the door. The silence she left behind was heavier than any shout, more profound than any threat. It was the sound of a period being placed where he had expected a comma. She put her hand on the ornate brass handle, the metal cool and solid under her palm, and pulled the door open, stepping out of his world as easily as she had stepped in. She did not look back. The long walk back down the marble corridor felt different this time. The air, once thick with tension, now seemed to crackle with the aftershock of her departure. The guards at the door had watched her go with wide, disbelieving eyes. The severe woman with the clipboard was frozen mid-stride, her mouth a perfect "oh" of astonishment. Naomi kept her chin high, her gaze fixed on the grand entryway at the far end of the hall. Each click of her heels was an assertion of her own worth, a declaration that she would not be diminished or dismissed. She had come to see what power looked like, and she had found it wanting. It was brittle, arrogant, and entirely uninterested in anything it could not immediately control. She was almost at the main doors, the promise of the open air and her waiting car just feet away, when she heard it. Footsteps. Hurried, sharp, and multiplying. Not the heavy, measured tread of guards, but something more urgent. She didn't turn. She quickened her own pace, her hand reaching for the massive, carved wooden door. She was not going to be dragged back for a lecture on etiquette. She had said her piece by saying nothing at all. Her fingers brushed against the wood just as a voice, female and sharp as shattering glass, cut through the air. Stop. It was a command, not a request. Naomi paused, her back still to the source of the voice. She could feel the presence of several people behind her now, their collective energy a palpable force. Slowly she turned. It was not Jae-hwan. Standing a few feet away was a woman who shared his aristocratic features and cold, intelligent eyes. She was older, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit the color of cream, her expression a mask of controlled fury. Flanking her were two of the same granite-carved guards from the office, their positions creating a subtle, impassable barrier. "I am Kwon Ji-woo," the woman said, her voice dangerously soft. "Jae-hwan's older sister. You will come back." Naomi's spine stiffened. "I believe my interview is concluded." "You are mistaken," Ji-woo replied, her eyes narrowing. "You did not conclude an interview. You delivered an insult. No one walks out on my brother. No one. The process ends when he says it ends." Naomi's gaze flickered to the guards. They were perfectly still, but their stillness was that of a predator waiting for the signal to strike. This was no longer about a disastrous marriage interview. She had breached some unspoken code, a rule of a world she didn't belong to, and now they were closing ranks. "With all due respect, Ms. Kwon," Naomi said, keeping her tone level, "your brother made it clear I was not a suitable candidate. I simply agreed with his assessment and saved us both further time." "You saved no one," Ji-woo snapped, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume, something floral with a sharp, metallic undertone, reached Naomi. "You created a spectacle. In this house, in front of candidates chosen to represent the most influential families, you showed a profound lack of respect. That has consequences. It creates a perception of weakness. We do not tolerate the perception of weakness." Naomi finally understood. This wasn't personal. It was political. Her walking out wasn't an affront to Jae-hwan's ego. It was a crack in the family's armor of invincibility. It was a story that would leave this house and be twisted into 100 different versions, each one chipping away at the Kwon family's absolute authority. "I have no interest in your family's politics," Naomi stated plainly. "I'm leaving." She turned back to the door, but one of the guards moved with silent, fluid speed, placing himself directly in her path. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. His body was a wall of muscle and tailored wool. "That is no longer your decision to make," Ji-woo said from behind her. Her voice had lost its heat, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. "You created a problem, Miss Preston. Now you will come back inside, and you will help us solve it. My brother is waiting." The choice was an illusion. The polite fiction of a civilized meeting had been stripped away, revealing the steel cage beneath. She was trapped, not by chains, but by a web of honor, face, and brutal power she had so carelessly stumbled into. Her simple act of self-respect had been interpreted as an act of war. Swallowing the bitter taste of capitulation, Naomi slowly turned away from the door and faced Jiwoo. The older woman's expression was unreadable, but there was a glint of something that might have been grim satisfaction in her dark eyes. Without a word, Naomi started walking back down the long marble hall, the two guards falling into step behind her, a silent, menacing escort. She was no longer a candidate, nor was she a guest. She was a complication, being led back to the man at the center of the web. The air was colder now, the scent of lilies cloying and funereal. The house, which had seemed so opulent just an hour ago, now felt like a magnificent, inescapable prison. The heavy doors to Kwon Jae-hwan's office swung open before they reached them. He was standing just inside, no longer behind the fortress of his desk. He had shed his suit jacket, and the white shirt he wore was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the sharp line of his collarbone. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a caged panther. His eyes locked onto Naomi's the moment she crossed the threshold. The guards and his sister remained in the hallway, pulling the doors closed behind her, sealing them in together. The click of the latch was deafeningly final. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room was a vacuum, all the air sucked out by the unspoken confrontation. He was studying her, but this time it wasn't a dismissal. It was an assessment, sharp and analytical, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. "That was a foolish thing to do," he said finally, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Was it?" Naomi countered, her fear solidifying into defiance. Or was it the only sane response to a ridiculous situation? "You sized me up in 5 seconds and wrote me off." I simply returned the courtesy. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "You misunderstand the situation, Miss Preston. This is not a corporate negotiation where two parties can agree to disagree and walk away. You did not walk away from a deal. You walked away from me. In my own home. In front of my organization and my rivals." "Your rivals?" she asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "What do I have to do with your rivals?" He took a step toward her, his movements economical and precise. "My father, in his infinite wisdom, decided a marriage would quell the rumors of instability that have been circulating since his retirement. He orchestrated this parade. An open call, designed to show that the Kwon family is strong enough to have its pick of any bride. It was a power play," he gestured vaguely at the room. "I found the entire exercise insulting. I was doing my best to end it. My rudeness was intentional. It was meant to drive away the sycophants and the social climbers. It was working perfectly." He stopped just a few feet from her. "Until you." Naomi stared at him, the pieces clicking into place. "You were trying to get them to leave." "I was," he confirmed. "But they wouldn't. They smiled, they simpered, they absorbed the insults because they want the power that comes with my name. They have no pride. But you," he paused, his gaze intense. "You do. You called my bluff. You are the only one who had the self-possession to stand up and walk out. And now, every single person who is in that hall is talking about it. The woman who rejected Kwon Jae-hwan." He turned and walked to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtain to look out at the garden. "My enemies do not believe in coincidence. They will not see your departure as an act of personal pride. They will see it as a message. They will think you are with a rival clan. They will think you are a plant, a spy who was sent to embarrass me. Or they will think you are something to me, someone I value, and that you left because you were angry. Either way, you are now a person of interest." A cold dread washed over Naomi. This was so much bigger than a job interview gone wrong. Her simple act of defiance had painted a target on her back in a world where targets tended to disappear. "That's insane," she breathed. "I don't know any of these people. I'm just me, an architect." "It doesn't matter who you are," he said, turning back to face her. His expression was grim. "It only matters who they think you are. By walking out that door, you made yourself a part of my story. And my story is currently a violent one." The finality in his tone sent a chill down her spine. He had laid the facts out not as a warning, but as an immutable truth. She had stumbled onto a stage in the middle of a play, and now she had a role whether she wanted it or not. The door she had so confidently walked through had not led to freedom, but to the center of the cage. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Naomi's mind raced, trying to find an exit, a logical path out of this labyrinth of deadly assumptions. "So, what does that mean?" she asked, her voice tight. "You tell them. You issue a statement, tell your people that it was a misunderstanding, that I'm a civilian who has nothing to do with any of this." He gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Do you think this is a press conference? That I can correct the record with a well-worded release? My world does not operate on public statements. It operates on perception and violence. To deny you now, so publicly, would only confirm to them that you are important. It would be like painting a target on you in fluorescent paint." He moved back towards his desk, picking up the smooth white stone again, his thumbs stroking its surface. The simple, repetitive motion was a stark contrast to the chaos he was describing. "My enemies, particularly the head of the Viper clan, a man named Cho, are looking for any leverage they can find. A new face, an unknown variable. You are a loose thread he will not be able to resist pulling." Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, a subconscious gesture of self-protection. "So, what do you want from me? I can't stay here. I have a life, a business to run." "Your business is the last thing you should be worried about right now," he said, his tone sharpening. "Your safety is the only thing that matters. And for the foreseeable future, the only place you are safe is with me." It wasn't a request. It was a verdict. He was offering her protection, but it was the protection of a jailer. A gilded cage was still a cage. "No," she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. "Absolutely not. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," he insisted, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. "If you walk out of this house today, I cannot guarantee you will make it home. Cho's people are not subtle. They will approach you. They will threaten you. They will try to turn you, or they will simply eliminate you to send me a message." The clinical way he spoke of her potential elimination made her blood run cold. This wasn't a movie. This was real. Just as the thought crossed her mind, a sharp, cracking sound echoed from outside, distant but unmistakable. It wasn't a car backfiring. It was the dry, percussive report of a high-powered rifle. Jaehwan moved with a speed that was terrifying. In an instant, the bored aristocrat vanished, replaced by something lethal. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, grabbing Naomi's arm and yanking her away from the windows, pushing her down behind the massive mahogany desk. His body shielded hers, his hand firm on the back of her neck. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear. Another shot cracked through the air, this one closer. The sound of shattering glass came from somewhere down the hall. Shouts erupted from outside the office. Through the gap between the desk and the floor, Naomi could see Jaehwan's feet planted, his stance solid and unwavering. He hadn't even flinched. He was a creature of this environment, as comfortable in a firefight as she was in a boardroom. The danger he had described was no longer an abstract concept. It was here. It was loud, and it was trying to get in. And the only thing between her and it was the man who had, just moments ago, been her captor. The shouting outside intensified, a mix of Korean and English commands barked with military precision. The immediate threat seemed to pass, the sounds of conflict moving further away, towards the estate's perimeter. Jaehwan didn't move for a long, tense moment. His body remained a solid shield over hers, the warmth of him seeping through her dress. She could feel the steady, calm beat of his heart against her back, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of her own. His hand was still on her neck, his thumb resting just below her ear. It wasn't a rough grip. It was firm, possessive, and strangely grounding. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, not a heavy musk, but something crisp and complex, like cedarwood and cold night air. Finally, he straightened up, his hand falling away. The loss of contact left her skin feeling strangely cold. He moved to a small, discreet panel on the wall and pressed a button. "Status," he said into a hidden speaker. A voice, tinny and strained, came back immediately. "Vipers at the West Gate, boss. A single shooter." It was a message. They're retreating. Casualties. None on our side. They shattered a window in the west gallery. That's all. Understood. Double the perimeter patrols. I want eyes on every approach, Jae-hwan commanded. He turned back to Naomi, who was slowly getting to her feet, her legs unsteady. His black eyes swept over her, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to assessment, as if he were re-evaluating her, seeing her now through the lens of the violence she had just witnessed. A message, he said, his voice flat. They know you're here. They know you didn't leave. They were watching the house. Naomi leaned against the desk for support, her mind struggling to process the rapid escalation. From a contentious interview to a forced return to a shooting, her entire reality had tilted on its axis. They were shooting at me, she whispered. No, he said, and for the first time, his voice held a trace of something other than cold command. It was a grim reassurance. They were shooting at the house. To let me know they can reach it. To let me know they see you as a piece on the board. If they had wanted to hit you, you would have been hit. The brutal pragmatism of his words was somehow more terrifying than the shooting itself. He walked over to her, stopping closer than he had before. The space between them felt charged, electric. He reached out, not to grab her, but to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so unexpected, so incongruously gentle, that she flinched. His fingers were cool against her skin. You see now, he said softly, his gaze locked on hers. There is no walking away. Not for you. Not anymore, he let his hand drop. My sister'll show you to a suite in the East Wing. It's the most secure part of the house. You will stay there. My people will retrieve whatever you need from your home. He said her name then for the first time since that initial, dismissive introduction. Naomi, it sounded different. Not an item on a list, but a word with weight and texture. In his mouth, her name was a responsibility, a problem, and maybe, just maybe, something more. She looked into his unyielding eyes and knew he was right. Leaving wasn't an option. Survival was. And for now, survival looked exactly like him. The days that followed were a blur of gilded captivity. The suite Jae-hwan had assigned her was larger than her entire apartment, a cavern of silk sheets, polished dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a private, walled garden. It was beautiful, luxurious, and utterly inescapable. 2 guards were posted outside her door at all times, silent and impassive. They were her protectors and her jailers. Naomi spent the first 48 hours in a state of simmering rage and anxiety, pacing the length of the suite like a caged animal. Her phone had been taken, for security reasons, and her access to the outside world was completely severed. She was a ghost in her own life. On the 3rd day, Ji-woo appeared at her door. She carried a tablet, its screen glowing. Your company needs you, she said without preamble, handing it over. We've established a secure line. You can conduct your business from here. Your associates have been told you are on an unexpected but vital consulting trip overseas. The story is holding. Naomi took the tablet, her fingers closing over the cool metal. It was a leash, but it was also a lifeline. A connection to the world she had built, the person she was before all of this. For the next few days, she threw herself into her work, losing herself in blueprints and zoning regulations, creating a small island of normalcy in the sea of madness. She saw Jae-hwan only fleetingly. A glimpse of him crossing a courtyard, deep in conversation with his lieutenants. A brief, charged moment when their eyes met across a long hallway before he turned and was gone. He was a constant, unnerving presence, the master of her gilded prison. One evening, unable to sleep, she slipped out into the private garden attached to her suite. The night air was cool, fragrant with jasmine. From the other side of a high stone wall, she heard voices. Jae-hwan and his sister. Their tones were low and tense. Cannot trust him after what happened with Min-jun, Ji-woo was saying, her voice sharp with anger. Blood meant nothing to him. He sold us out for a pittance. Father was a fool to ever believe in him. Min-jun was weak, Jae-hwan's voice replied, cold as steel. He was seduced by promises from Cho. He thought he could play both sides. He learned his lesson. The The finality in his tone made Naomi's skin crawl.
Minhyun.
A brother? A cousin? Whoever he was, his betrayal had clearly carved a deep wound into the family and into Jae-hwan himself. It explained his paranoia, his immediate suspicion of everyone. He had been betrayed by his own blood. Of course, he would trust no one else. This was his wound, the vulnerability he kept hidden beneath layers of ice and steel. A few days later, one of the housekeepers, a young woman named Sora with perpetually frightened eyes, brought Naomi her evening meal. As she set the tray down, her hand trembled and a small, folded piece of paper fell from her sleeve onto the table. Her eyes darted towards the door, wide with terror. She gave Naomi a desperate, pleading look before bowing quickly and scurrying out of the room. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs. She waited until the door was firmly shut before picking up the note. The handwriting was shaky. "They have my brother. They say you can help.
Please.
Meet me in the library at midnight."
Come alone.
Naomi's mind raced. This was a trap. It had to be. A test from Jae-hwan, or worse, a genuine attempt by his enemies to reach her. Her first instinct was to call the guards, to hand over the note, and expose the plot. But then she thought of Sora's terrified face. She thought of the cold, final way Jae-hwan had spoken of the traitor, Min-jun. If she turned Sora in, the girl would disappear. Jae-hwan's justice was swift and absolute. Could she live with that? Could she send that terrified young woman to her death? For the first time, she was being asked to make a choice in this world, not just react to it. Reporting Sora was the smart, safe thing to do. It was the choice of a survivor. But looking at the desperate plea, another option presented itself. A dangerous, morally gray option. She could go. She could hear Sora out. She could gather intelligence. It was a risk, a monumental one. But it was also an act of agency in a situation where she had none. She folded the note, her decision made. She was crossing a line, and she knew she could never go back. The library was a vast, two-story chamber of shadows and the scent of old paper. Moonlight streamed through the arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. Naomi moved between the towering shelves, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. Sora was waiting by the fireplace, wringing her hands, her face pale and tear-streaked. The moment she saw Naomi, a wave of relief washed over her features. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who else to turn to." "Who has your brother?" Naomi asked, keeping her voice low and even, pushing down her own fear. "Men who work for a man named Cho," Sora cried softly. "They say he wants to talk to you." "Just talk." "They say if you pass a message for them, they'll let my brother go. They swear no one will get hurt." "What message?" Naomi asked, her eyes scanning the shadowy corners of the room. Sora handed her another folded piece of paper. "It's just a shipping manifest. For one of the Kwan family's import businesses. They want you to confirm that the shipment is arriving at the port tomorrow night at 10-inch. It seemed harmless enough. Too harmless. A simple confirmation of a business detail. But in this world, information was ammunition. Confirming that manifest could be confirming the location of a valuable product, or worse, the location of a key person. It was a trap. Naomi knew it with every fiber of her being. But looking at Sora's desperate, pleading face, she saw a mirror of her own helplessness. Sora was a pawn, just like her.
"Please," Sora begged. "He's all I have."
Naomi made a split-second decision. A calculated risk. "All right," she said softly. "Tell them the shipment is confirmed. Pierchtere, 10 o'clock." It was a lie. Ji-woo, during one of their work sessions, had complained about port logistics. Naomi knew for a fact that the family's shipments never came in at Pier 4. It was territory controlled by a neutral party. She was feeding them false information, hoping it would expose their intentions without getting anyone killed. It was a dangerous gamble. She was playing their game, using their methods. Sora sobbed with relief, thanking her profusely before slipping away into the darkness. Naomi stayed in the library for a long time, the weight of her decision settling upon her. She had lied. She had conspired. She had stepped willingly into the morass of their world, and the clean lines of her old life felt a million miles away. The next day passed in a haze of anxiety. Naomi expected sirens, alarms, some sign that her gamble had backfired spectacularly. But the house remained quiet, the routine unbroken. The silence was more unnerving than an explosion. That evening, as she was picking at a meal she had no appetite for, the door to her suite opened without a knock. Jae-hwan stood there, his face a thundercloud. He wasn't wearing a suit, but dark jeans and a simple black shirt that did nothing to hide the lethal power in his frame. He said nothing. He just looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the full, terrifying extent of her miscalculation. "There was an ambush at Pier 4 tonight," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "A reception committee from the Viper clan, waiting for a shipment that never existed." Naomi's blood turned to ice. My men were not there," he continued, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Because you sent Cho's men to the wrong place. But my allies, the ones who controlled at Pier, were not so lucky. 2 of their men are dead. You started a war on a new front, Naomi." He wasn't shouting. He was worse. He was dissecting her, his words precise and devastating. He walked towards her, and for the first time, she felt a genuine, primal fear of him. "I was trying to protect Sora," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They had her brother." "Sora has no brother," he said, his voice flat. "He died 2 years ago. Cho's people were lying to her, and she, in turn, lied to you. And you, in your naivete, believed her." He stopped in front of her chair, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. "You should have come to me. And you would have had her killed." Naomi shot back, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of defiance. "I saw your face when you talked about Minjun. I heard you. Your justice is absolute." She was just a scared girl. His eyes flashed with something hot and raw. Minjun betrayed his blood. Sora was a compromised element in a war. There are rules. You broke them. You acted on emotion, and that emotion got 2 innocent men killed. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had tried to do the right thing, to be compassionate, and she had made everything infinitely worse. Tears of shame and frustration welled in her eyes. She had failed. She had proven she didn't belong here, that she was a liability. She expected him to banish her, to cast her out, or worse. She braced for the final, cutting verdict. Instead, he crouched down in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. The anger in his eyes was still there, but it was warring with something else, something complex and unsettling. "You have a conscience," he said, his voice a low murmur. "In my world, that is the most dangerous thing a person can possess." He reached out, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. The touch was electric, a shock of warmth against her cold skin. "It is also," he added, his gaze holding hers, "the only thing I find myself wanting." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was a confession of a weakness she had created in him. He saw her, not as a liability or a pawn, but as an anomaly he couldn't reconcile. And in that moment, she understood that her biggest mistake hadn't been lying to him. It had been making him feel. The aftermath of the Pier 4 incident settled over the mansion like a shroud. The air grew heavier, the guards more vigilant. Jae-hwan's confession, as raw and unexpected as it was, had changed everything between them. The space was no longer defined by captor and captive, but by a shared, dangerous secret. He knew she had acted against his interests. She knew he was drawn to the very part of her that made her a danger to him. The tension was a living thing, a third presence in every silent room they shared. He started seeking her out, not for interrogations, but for quiet moments that felt stolen from the chaos. He would find her in the library, and they would sit in silence, him reading a leather-bound book, her sketching in a notebook his sister had provided. He never spoke of the ambush again, but his presence was a constant reminder of the consequences of her actions. He also began to talk. Not about his business, but about small things. the history of a particular piece of art in the hallway, the type of tea his mother used to prefer. Each detail was a tiny, carefully offered piece of himself, a stark contrast to the impenetrable fortress he had once been. He was showing her the man behind the monster, and she found herself, against all better judgment, wanting to see more. She told herself it was a survival mechanism, a way to understand her captor. She was lying to herself. The enemy, however, was not idle. Cho, embarrassed and enraged by the failed ambush, escalated his tactics. The threat was no longer a distant gunshot or a whispered conspiracy. It became personal. One afternoon, Jiwoo entered Naomi's suite, her face pale, her usual composure fractured. She held out her phone. The screen showed a live news report. A fire at a downtown office building. Naomi's office building. "It's your firm," Jiwoo said, her voice strained. "The fire department is calling it arson." Naomi stared at the screen, at the images of smoke billowing from the windows of the space she had poured her heart and soul into. Blueprints, client files, years of her life turning to ash. It wasn't just an attack on a building, it was an erasure of her identity, of the life she had before Kwon Jae-hwan. It was a message directly to her. "We can take everything from you." Jae-hwan found her there, still staring at the phone, long after his sister had left. He stood in the doorway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He said nothing, but the fury rolling off him was a palpable force. It was a cold, controlled rage that was far more terrifying than any shouting. He was angry for her. "This is my fault," she said, her voice hollow. "No," he replied, his voice a low growl. "This is mine. I brought this into your life. I will end it." That night, the mansion went into lockdown. The pretense of a consulting trip was dropped. Naomi was moved from her luxurious suite to a smaller, more defensible room in the core of the house, windowless and secure. The war had come to her doorstep, and Jae-hwan was preparing for a siege. The final confrontation felt inevitable, a storm gathering just over the horizon. The peace of the house was shattered, replaced by the quiet, efficient hum of an organization preparing for battle. Men in dark suits moved through the halls with a new urgency, their faces grim. The attack came just before dawn, the hour of ghosts and assassins. It wasn't a frontal assault.
Cho was smarter than that.
He used the one vulnerability Naomi herself had exposed: the staff. A coordinated effort from a handful of compromised servants allowed a small, elite team of Vipers to bypass the outer perimeter and infiltrate the house itself. The first sign of trouble was the sudden, jarring silence as the power was cut, plunging the entire mansion into an inky blackness, broken only by the emergency lights that cast long, dancing shadows. An alarm blared, a shrill, piercing sound. In seconds, Jae-hwan was at her door, a pistol in his hand, his face illuminated by the red emergency light. "They're inside," he said, his voice calm and lethal. He pulled her out of the room. Gunshots echoed from the floor below. The battle had begun. He started to lead her down a service corridor, towards a panic room, but their path was cut off by two of Cho's men appearing at the end of the hall. Jae-hwan pushed her behind him, raising his weapon. In that split second, Naomi's mind, trained to see layouts and systems, went into overdrive. She wasn't a soldier, but she knew this house. She had spent weeks studying its bones. "The old intercom," she said, her voice a sharp whisper. "In the security office. It's on a separate power circuit. We can use it." He glanced at her, his eyes questioning. There was no time to explain. While he engaged the two men in a swift, brutal exchange of fire, Naomi didn't cower. She ran. Not away, but towards the heart of the house, towards the central security office she had seen on a blueprint. It was a gamble, but it was better than being a target. She burst into the small, dark room. The main monitors were dead, but as she had guessed, a single, ancient-looking panel with a microphone was faintly glowing. It was a relic from the original construction, a system Jae-hwan's father had installed. She grabbed the microphone, her hand shaking, and pressed the all-call button. There in the West Gallery, she broadcast, her voice echoing through the hidden speakers in the walls, hoping it was loud enough to be heard over the gunfire. They're trying to flank from the West Gallery. It was a complete fabrication. She had no idea where the attackers were. But she knew Jaehwan's men would be drawn to the sound of her voice, and she was betting that Cho's men would be, too. She was turning herself into bait to create a kill box. It was the most terrifying decision of her life. Moments later, she heard the sounds of fighting converge on the gallery, just as she'd planned. She had changed the battlefield. She had taken his men and Cho's and pointed them at each other, using only her voice. She wasn't a victim to be rescued. She was a weapon he never knew he had. The battle was short and brutal. Naomi's gambit had worked. By drawing the intruders to a single, known location, she had given Jaehwan's men a decisive advantage. The last gunshot echoed through the house, and then fell into a ringing silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Sirens Jaehwan had no doubt arranged to arrive precisely when the conflict was over. She stayed huddled in the security office, her body trembling with adrenaline, until the main power flickered back on. The monitors blinked to life, showing scenes of carnage and control. Jaehwan's men were securing the hallways, their movements efficient and grim. Then he was there, filling the doorway of the small office. He was no longer pristine. There was a dark stain on his sleeve and a cut over his eyebrow, but his eyes were fixed on her, burning with an intensity that stripped away all pretense. He walked over to where she sat and crouched in front of her, just as he had done after the ambush at the pier. He took the cold, useless microphone from her hands, his fingers wrapping around hers. "My men are trained for any assault," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "But we would have been fighting blind in the dark. You gave us eyes. You saved lives." He looked at her, not as an architect or a complication, but as an equal. "My father wanted a wife to secure his legacy, a pretty, silent piece of property to be displayed. He was a fool." His grip on her hand tightened. "What I needed was an ally." He didn't say he loved her. He didn't have to. In his world, ally was a more sacred, more binding word. It meant trust. It meant fighting side by side. It meant a bond forged in fire and blood. He rose to his feet, pulling her up with him. The cost of this alliance was laid bare all around them, in the scarred walls, the smell of cordite, the life she had lost forever. Nothing in this world was free. "Cho is finished," he stated, a promise and a verdict in one. "His organization will be dismantled by morning. The threat to you is over." He paused, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. "I can make you disappear. A new life, anywhere you want. New identity, money, complete freedom. No one will ever find you. You can walk away from all of this, and I will never bother you again." He was offering her an out. A real one, this time. The escape she had so desperately wanted from the very beginning. She could go back to being Naomi Preston, or a version of her, somewhere far away from the violence and the shadows. She could be safe. She looked at him, at the man who had been her captor, her protector, her greatest danger, and her unlikely confidant. She saw the cut on his face, the weariness in his eyes, and the unyielding strength that held him together. Walking away would be a kind of death, an amputation of a part of herself she hadn't known existed until she met him. Safety felt like a pale, flavorless thing compared to the terrifying, vibrant reality of standing by his side. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she lifted her free hand and gently, deliberately, touched the cut above his eye. His breath hitched, and his eyes closed for a fraction of a second. It was an answer, a choice made not in fear or desperation, but with a clear and certain heart. The final image was not one of a declaration or a kiss. It was of her hand on his face, a quiet claim in the aftermath of a war, the silence between them no longer empty, but filled with the terrifying, absolute weight of her decision to stay.